So my name is Elena Litani, and I'm going to be today moderating the panel on real-time treasury, actually the pathway to real-time treasury. Hopefully most of you are aware about this topic, but hopefully we'll dive deeper and have more interesting conversation today. So before I start, I would like to introduce some of my fellow panelists. So I'm sure you read some of the bios, so I'll do short introductions. Let me start with Cathy, the payments goddess.
Oh, thank you.
She's a VP, head of client management at HSBC, responsible for liquidity and cash management solutions. Then Kate is a new business owner who recently came back from skiing sabbatical and spent 18 plus years in wholesale and retail in the energy sector.
You got it.
And then Chloé, who is pragmatist and realist and comes from a corporate world. So she's a VP of Treasury in Bombardier. And she spent 20 plus years in that space and with experience in multiple industries, including telecom, media, right? All of you remember 2008, the crisis when financial services, maybe I'll take it off. Do you guys know what's going on?
No, put closer to you.
Higher? Higher? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So in 2008, there has been a financial crisis, which sent ripples around the world. And I think Treasury was under tremendous pressure, especially corporates. You needed to know where money is. You need the money right away. And especially the corporates who did have a Treasury decentralized had an issue of, where my money is. How do I get it fast? So since then, for about 10 years, there's been a transformation. So some companies looked at the centralization. Many brought in-house banking. We've seen some technology advancements, the one which recently we've talked about, a couple sessions touched on virtual accounts, ability to give treasurers the capability to open accounts very fast and not to go in person to a bank. So, but I think more importantly, we see from consumer perspective, the expectations are changing. So for the last 10 years, the iPhones and smartphones became integral part of our lives. We want things now. We want things available at our fingertips. So, so when we talk about real-time treasury, Cathy, could you give us your explanation, what utopian world would look like?
So I do think this view of a real-time treasury and what would it look like, and I really think of it from four characteristics. So one is real-time, meaning that if there's an urgent payment that needs to be made to various organizations, you can do it. So that's an important part of it. It's the real-time capability, or when I want to make a payment. So whether that's batch or real-time. So I think that's an important part of a real-time treasury. The second piece is data. The payment means nothing if there is no data accompanying that payment, so that Kate and Chloé can, within their organizations, reconcile the payment, that receivable. Without that, it's a moot point. Thirdly, it's the ability to integrate the experience. So today, with our large corporates, there's a host-to-host or some sort of file upload solution. Or with our smaller clients, we have partnerships with a number of different accounting packages. So being able to integrate that solution within the corporate's environment, but more than just connecting files, really integrating into the experience and changing the treasurer's experience so that you can make decisions at a point in time. You can see where all the information is. And the last piece I think about when I think of a real-time treasury, this utopian environment, is smart. There is a ton of data out there. What did I read recently? 90% of all the data was created in the last 2 years. That's a 2017 stat, but that's a heck of a lot of data. But it's not information yet. So the ability to take that data and make smart decisions or be reminded to make smart decisions. To me, that's what a real-time Treasury utopian environment is. And I'm sure Chloé and Kate would have different perspectives on that, but being able to have payments when I want to send payments, real-time or batch, the ability to have rich data with those payments, thirdly, have it integrated with what I'm doing, and the ability to have a platform that's smart, where I don't have to chase the payment and see where it is. That's how I define it.
So that's great banking perspective. What do you girls think?
Yeah, look at me, the realist. Obviously, I mean, I look at this utopia and I say, wow, this is wonderful. Yeah. But then in a corporate world, obviously in any type of project, it takes money, it takes systems, and it involves, and even if you are talking about a centralized treasury, it doesn't mean that the other functions are centralized. Whether it is accounts payable, whether it is legal. So you have to contend with that. So I think that in order to, even though the world has literally transformed with respect to media and telecom, with respect to the consumer front, the retail side, the corporate treasury in the last 10 years has not yet transformed. We are still, as you mentioned, chasing money, chasing information and payment. I used to work at, now I'm at Bombardier, but I used to work at Videotron before, so media, telecom, retail. We actually had this account that was called Mrs. Videotron, and it's really, and basically, it was money that we had received, but we didn't know who had paid. So to tell you, and I mean, that's a reality, because in Canada, the information doesn't, the information and the payment, they don't come together. So we have to find ways in order to fix that. And we're told that it's coming, so that's going to be a great thing. And this is also an element. And now I just started working in a global company, and I mean, we do business in all over the globe. It's basically Bombardier Transportation as sells and makes trains and produces trains all over the world. And this means that this Canadian reality is compounded to the world, with different regulation, different time zone, obviously currency. So basically what I'm saying is that this is amazing, but there's a lot of work to be done to get there.
Sure. So when I think about a real-time treasury utopia, I think it really depends on where you're coming from and where you're going from a company perspective and where you are in the business life cycle. So at my last company that I was with, Just Energy, we went through a period of rapid organic growth. So because we went through so much growth dealing with 100,000 transactions up to millions of transactions a month, you really have to take that opportunity to look at your risk management approach, review your processes and procedures, make sure you're not taking on additional operational risk, and use that opportunity to automate as many processes as you can, get rid of all the manual processes that slow you down and really leave room for risk. And then if you look at it from an M&A perspective, on a company that is doing a lot of M&A, you need to be able to have your cash forecasting dead on, so you have that money to pay for that business when you want it. But also with M&A, you get a lot of inherited banking relationships, bank accounts. So again, you'll want to look at maybe you can decrease the number of banks you're dealing with, maybe decrease the number of bank accounts you have to try to eliminate or reduce your transactional costs. So I think that Treasury can always be going through this, a type of transformation. It just really depends on what that driver is and where you're starting from.
Yeah, that makes sense. And some of you already touched on it, but ultimately I was wondering, from your perspective today, what do you see the biggest challenges, or what are you struggling with day to day? And maybe, Chloé, you could start.
I would say struggling with just the fact that in order to get to this real-time treasury, to access your cash anywhere, you need to centralize, that's one thing, and that's a decision, and that's something that it's irrespective of the technology. We had this discussion, and at Videotron we decided that, or at Quebecois we decided that we were centralizing in 2003 and had everything in the same banks. It's much easier when you're Canadian and local, so that's, and some stuff that was hindering centralization, such as people paying with cash, it's gone away. I mean, most of the people now pay with a card, or so that solved issues. Now, when you look at it on a global perspective, the real issue is that you have regulation that causes a problem in order to be able to pool all your money together. Obviously, the currency, and you need to make a lot of transactions, and and also just simply the reality that anything that you're going to put in place, a new system, you need to make a business case. Because let's face it, I'm not going to be allocated money if I cannot show that I can have a valid business case or it pays by itself. Mm-hmm. So, and we all know that investing in system and it takes a lot of money. So that's the reality, and that's what we face as corporate.
Makes sense.
And I mean, even talked about, and that's the analogy we made as, swimming in Australia. I mean, we haven't talked about fraud here yet, or controls, or anything of the like. Yeah. So these are all realities.
And I think that's what Kate was feeling passionate about, the cybersecurity, right? Do you want to?
I would imagine a lot of you were on the main stage just before lunch when they talked about the number of fraudulent transactions, and even the big companies are falling victim to the organized crime. So cybersecurity, by far, my #1 challenge. I think about my first day on the job as treasurer at Just Energy, and I got this email from our executive director saying, can you transfer $17,000, which is pennies really, but of my board, I want to make a good impression, this is a person that I need to have on my side. Then I started looking through it, I thought, well, she doesn't usually call me by my full name, that's very strange. And then there's a few other things. I noticed the email address in the end is what clued me in, is just had 2 T's when it shouldn't have 2 T's. So I went over to my controller and talked to her about it. She said, oh yeah, we get these all the time. And I thought, this is my first day as treasurer, so I have a lot to learn, obviously, but it was surprising that nobody had thought to mention something like that. That's such a big concern. So luckily, we hadn't fallen prey to it. We did a lot of education and a lot of, sending out emails and seeing how many people clicked. But in this complex, fragmented banking fintech world, cybersecurity is for sure my #1 concern.
And imagine when it's real time, the money's gone instantaneously. So we've seen lots of examples in the press on how that happens. So I think that environment is critical, having those controls, the education, the awareness. And I'd add the interoperability. I think you touched on it, Chloe. There are all various systems all around the world. ISO 20022, great, but there are different flavors of ISO 20022, and we're not even there yet. So being able to have a system that's interoperable within the country, within the world, has to be a huge challenge, because you're doing the translating. You're trying to figure out how to piece all these things together, or even interoperability within your own systems that you have. So that's going to be a challenge to getting real time.
I mean, language, as you mentioned, is indeed a problem. We run into a situation where we receive documentation, but we can't read it. We're dealing with a bank in Mexico, and everything was in Spanish. I don't speak Spanish, but we receive documentation in German. So we had to have someone that we trusted that could translate it. So this is a reality that we have to contend with when you're on a global scale.
Yeah.
No, for sure.
And Cathy, you speak to clients all the time. So from bank perspective, what do you see the biggest challenges, I guess, or concerns?
So I have a product background, and I love product, and I'm very much a payment geek. But in my capacity right now, I lead a team that does all the onboarding and servicing for our global liquidity and cash management products. So it's been a very eye-opening experience when I talk to clients, because it's not the real-time coolness or the coolness of another product. It really is, as Chloe said, those fundamental basic things that become roadblocks. So the documentation being in the right language, the documentation actually being easy to follow, the process not involving capturing the same information multiple times, facilitating the account opening process, because we know that can be signature verification. So it's almost the very simple, pragmatic things that we think magically disappear. That's what's causing significant pain points as I talk to clients. So I love the product, and don't get me wrong, the real-time, cryptocurrency, the cybersecurity solutions, whatever is coming out, those are real tangible pieces. But really sweating and thinking through the full end-to-end for treasurers like Kate and Chloe, I think is really where we need to spend a lot of time doing better.
Yeah. So as we get in on this road, right, it's a road, it's a journey, right, to get to somewhat real-time treasury, or hopefully some not a utopian version, but a practical version of real-time treasury. I think real-time payments or payment rails is one of the potential key enablers. Yeah. And while in Canada, as we were told earlier, we kind of stalled on RTR front, hopefully we're making some progress, but if we see around the world, there are countries which have successfully implemented real-time payments. Specifically, if we look at Europe, SEPA was launched, I think, in 2008, but it originally was launched as Central European Payment Scheme, which just enabled credit and debit. But already by 2014, 99.4% of payments, retail payments, went through this network, which is amazing rate of adoption, right, for European, and it's 34 European countries plus some other countries as well. And then if they didn't stop that, they launched the instant credit capability in late 2017. So it's been a year and a half, even less than that, and by now there's 20 countries already supporting the real-time scheme, as well as more than 50% of PSPs, or the 2,000 payment service providers, are on that scheme offering services. And yes, it's limited. It's only 15,000 euros you can transfer in this scheme. And yes, it's not real time. It's up to 10 seconds, but it's really getting there.
Yes. I think that's good enough.
That's good.
I don't know. What do you think?
And on top of it, it has rich data, right? So I think that looking at other parts of the world where it exists today, what do you think about real-time payments?
So my thoughts are, from a Canadian perspective, we really need to get it, because if we don't, then all of the fintechs that are interested in this space and this opportunity, so to speak, it kind of goes away, and they might be interested in other countries and other jurisdictions. So that's important that we get there, right? But when I think about real-time payments, it also creates an opportunity to really set yourself apart from a customer experience perspective, whether good or bad. So just an easy example, or thoughts anyway, do we have to staff call centers 24/7 to make sure that they're available to answer questions on payment 24 hours a day? What about the systems? Do we have the proper risks and controls in place for 24/7 fraud detection? And just an easy application, I've gotten calls when I forget to pay a bill. So as a corporation, I actually pay somebody to make calls to my customers who aren't paying their bills. So what if a customer pays and I don't know from a corporation perspective that that's actually been paid? So I'm now paying somebody to call this person to create this negative customer experience. So unless I'm able to adapt my systems and make sure I'm doing upgrades where necessary to take advantage of the real time when it's available, I'm going to pay more money and I'm going to have a worse customer experience.
That's correct. I think you nail. And I think that's what we see in Europe as well. We see that as those rails becoming available, banks are partnering with fintech, they have large TMS providers to enable that kind of connectivity, and I think that's going to be coming in critical for Canadian marketplace as well. Yeah. But when we were speaking earlier, Chloé, you were mentioning that there is some potential challenges which not only real time can solve, right? So it's reconciliation, and do you want to? Actually,
that's where I step in, and obviously real time. When we were talking about it, so this is great, real time. But then when I saw the maximum amount of the real time, that's when I kind of went, oh, okay, well, I'm not that excited. Because as a treasurer, the real time, well, first of all, at Bombardier, I mean, small $15,000, that's not happening. I mean, people are buying trains and planes. So we're talking payments by the million. That's the type of customers that you have. And on the other side as well, as a treasurer, you need to make payment on your debt, interest payment that are very, very, very time sensitive. It needs to be at DTC by this time. So obviously this creates a tremendous amount in the system. And right now, or even if you pay swap, cross-currency swap. So obviously cross-border payments are incredibly sensitive. And these are time-sensitive payments, and they're time-sensitive payments by the million. And right now, and I heard someone say that you can track your package anywhere in the world when you buy on Amazon. You know exactly where it is. But you send $200 million and you have no clue where it is. You press the button and now it's somewhere in the bank. And you wait, and you wait.
And you call.
And And you call.
Yes, and we answer.
What's going on?
And we answer.
Are you pushing it? Where is it? It was pre-authorized. What's going on? Because you know that TTC has obviously no forgiveness, and they're going to put you in default. You don't want to be in default. So, and then you get this notification. Okay, it's out. And now it's out. So it's like corresponding bank, other corresponding bank. Eventually it hits the account. So having this, if it's not real time, having the ability for a larger ticket amount to be able to trace where the amount is, and having some sort of commitment from the bank that it's going to be there within 2 hours, like a delivery service type of thing. So this is something that will help tremendously, because on the day that we close bond deals, you wouldn't believe the amount of energy that is being deployed inside the Treasury Department, but also within the bank, in order to make sure that this money is pushed. It's like, you know, pushing an elephant into this little tiny hole. Yeah. And that's the reality. So that's something that I think that it will change and obviously transform if we can track and decide the right payment.
The ability to watch the payment, I think, is absolutely key. Whether it flows real time, near time, slow time, batch time, whatever it is.
Knowing where.
That is what I'm hearing when we're out talking with our clients. And the phone calls we get from our clients asking, where is the payment? Because it is time sensitive. So whatever the payment rail looks like, feels like as it's built in Canada and around the world, that traceability is absolutely critical. Else it's for naught, frankly. I mean, switching,
and also to get visibility, because in your Utopia, we always refer to that because we like that. Yeah. When you look at your balance, if you have this 200 million that's in transit, then your balance is not showing the real picture. So there also needs to be some way, when eventually you pick up your phone and I see all my treasury, all my lending, all my cash and whatever position, I see it all on my phone, then I also have this element that is being reflected.
The reconciliation, right? So whether it's your example of the consumer paying their energy bill and it's reflected right away that they paid and the collector's not calling them, or it's the balance dropping for the DTC payment. Traceability and reconciling, I think, are absolutely fundamental, and those are the challenges here. I mean, Swift GPI, great solution, but it's also dependent on having everyone in the system part of that solution. So now Chloé can call HSBC. We can let you know where the payment is and where it is in the chain. But if that one link has not been onboarded and using that technology, we're waiting. We're all waiting to see where it is. So that traceability, fundamental.
And I think, again, as we've seen real-time payment rails available in countries domestically, right, the question becomes, how do you connect, right? So if one system is not real-time and the other is, it comes back to traceability, the interoperability of that messaging system. But also, I think, Chloé, you were mentioning that there is a complexity around FX and complexity, how do you do the currency switch? So any additional comments on that, on the challenges in cross-border?
Well, the cross-border payment are definitely an issue in terms of but there's also just trading in general. I mean, there are, right now you can actually trade your FX online with your bank platforms. That's all fine. It's all fine for small ticket item. But when you get into hedging, so obviously doing forward currency or options or anyway, you need to follow the various bank limits that you have. So you need to trade with various banks. So you can trade electronically or through any type of electronic platform. That's what we do. But we still need to have people that, and eventually maybe it's going to be a bot that's going to decide, but there's people that actually decide, I'm going to go with this particular bank because I know that they have the right algorithm and they can process my FX trade, and huge amount, because we trade a lot of currency at Bombardier, and they can process it with the right algorithm so that it doesn't impact the market. So that's a type of thing. So yes, the technology is there, but you still have to have a human being decided how you allocate those trades and how you execute those trades, depending on the size of the transaction.
That's the fourth characteristic of Utopia, by the way, smart.
So you need to be able to program someone to replicate that behavior.
Agreed.
So we've talked about real-time rails, but I think there are a couple of other enablers like regulatory changes like open banking and PSD2, and then technologies which potentially have an impact here too. So when we look at it, PSD2, and for some of you who might not know, it's a payment service directive which was came in place in Europe. I think it's again started early in 2008-ish, but since then they updated it to regulate other payment institutions and to enable them to act on a customer behalf to access customer accounts. So ultimately, if you look today in Canada, we have Flinks and Plate who are like kind of scraping bank interfaces and trying to, on your behalf, access and validate your account, which is we see as a need and like as a fintech. But other in Europe, that was happening, and they saw it, and they wanted to introduce consumer protection to ensure that the customer knows who they deal with, and yet not foster innovation to ensure that companies will continue push the limits. And then there is an open banking in the UK. So I know, Cathy, you know quite a bit. Can you allude to that as well?
So in a perfect world, of course, I'd love to take all of Chloé's banking and from Bombardier and be the sole provider. The reality is, whether it's diversification, risk management, we're not in all the geographies you need to be. It just doesn't make sense. So moving to an open banking platform, it really is the API technology, the application interface programming technology that's really going to help bring the glue together, bring that interoperability together to get us to that utopian space, in my view. And so whether it's regulated through something like open banking that we're seeing in other jurisdictions, and certainly HSBC is actively involved on the consumer side, whether it's through partners, whether it's a TMS or an ERP solution, we have to work together with the providers, the Kyrebas of the world, for example, so that we're enabling that payment applet within that model so it's seamless. So you're not opening 3 different screens, your ERP solution, your HSBC net platform, and then other bank that shall not be named platform. So that's not efficient for a treasurer. So to me, that's the partner model that needs to be evolved. And then lastly, I'll say there's even those one-off situations. So all banks for the smaller business segment have partnered with the accounting packages, Sage, Intuit, there's a long list there, so that things are integrated. So that openness is happening, and it's happening because of business need. I think it needs to continue to evolve, and I think I heard Justin this morning say a standard is a standard is a standard. So there's something around, we need to have standards that are true standards and something we can hold together. Else it's your job, Kate and Chloé's job, to pull all these Lego blocks together, which don't have the dots in the same spot. So that's a bit of a challenging building model to get to. How do you feel about that one?
No, I mean, just last week I asked, well, do we use all the same system? And the response was yes. So I'm like, great. No, but we're not on the same version. And what does that mean? Well, it means that one version does this, the other one, and it's not necessarily. So all being said that, I realized that by coming in a new job, it's really important to understand what we're talking about and the various system, the various platform. It's a complete.
Yeah.
You touched on the partnership thing, right? And in my perspective, it's really important for banks and fintechs to partner on some things. Banks historically haven't been on the forefront of innovation and technology. And fintechs have this opportunity where if they partner with a bank who, from an organizational perspective, I inherently trust the banks that I'm working with. And if they're good partners for my business and we have aligned interests, then if they bring together me with a fintech that's going to help me, whether a treasury management system or whatever, that gives them a step in, a foot in the door, so to speak. So I think it's really important that those partnerships continue to grow. And
it's like a fintech brings speed, right, and velocity versus bank bring the maturity, right? So collaboration hopefully is something, and that's what we see more and more in Canadian marketplace as well, but especially in the places where things are becoming more interesting, like Europe, Asia. There is a lot of partnerships and collaborations happening.
And I'd not only just speed and innovation, there is, we are moving to, and I know everyone's heard this, so please don't roll your eyes. We're moving to a market of one, right? Meaning where, no longer is there just one general type application that's going to work for every industry segment. It's going to be very specific, very niche software platforms are going to work. So when you're moving to a market of one, those fintechs are really going to know that very specific raw vegan industry, a raw vegan restaurant industry is going to have a very different need than a Burger King. And I'm sorry I used the name, but a fast food burger spot. So that's fantastic, because then when that goes to the treasurer and they're needing to figure out how to price vegetables, that's a very different model than a fast food model. So so I think it's also that piece of it.
Right,
Yeah,
and you were mentioning it like that there is no corporate probably which gonna just switch to one bank, because no one bank has a presence everywhere around the world. So you ultimately,
we're close, though.
HSBC. But ultimately you end up with multiple partnerships, and wouldn't it be wonderful, right, to get to this one dashboard, right, where you log in and see all this connectivity and connections to be available. And yes, and we see already some of the fintechs starting to offer this capability in the markets where the APIs are available and accessible.
We've seen that evolve a lot in terms of visibility, so I think that's a really good thing. Right. But the other element is, okay, that's fine. I know that my cash is sitting there and I know how much I have. But the next step is to have it all pooled in one single pool and single currency.
Yeah. Could you actually use it right
Because that's what you can use it. Because right now, the way it works is that I have money lying around a little bit everywhere. And on the other side, since it's not available, I need to borrow on the other side. So obviously in terms of and that's when I said I need to make a business case. So for those fintechs out there, for me, having, first of all, to see it, but to pull it, then I can make a really strong business case that I can save costs on the other end. And that's when I can get all those tools developed, because that's where,
Let's talk. nanoPay has a solution for you.
And then it'll help get rid of checks, right?
Yeah, that would help. Yeah, we had the discussion. Yeah, because you don't want to borrow extra money.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great, if maybe talk to that example, because I think it was brilliant in the sense that from a banking payment industry perspective, we always look at the bad check. Oh my God, it's incredibly expensive, onerous, and there's just so many issues with it. And I personally think, well, it's the small business, it's the mom and pop shop who is really looking to continue to use this very valuable piece of payment real estate, because it's also a reconciliation tool, all sorts of things. And then Chloé came back and said,
yeah, that's where I'm a bit of a black sheep with respect to that. But and it's from a Canadian perspective. As a treasurer, I like checks. Why? Because I benefited from the inefficiency of the thing, and I benefited from the float. That's one thing. So was I going, if I were to go completely to checks, from checks to EFT, then it would mean probably me borrowing 200 to 300 million extra on a permanent basis, just because of the float. And on top of everything, if right now the way the payment system works, and that's what I told the bank, if the information on the invoice doesn't go at the same time with my payment, it means that I need to hire 3 people sitting down and just answering questions and managing a relationship with my suppliers. So to me, I said, yeah, bad check, maybe. I like checks. And honestly, I'm very, very tech savvy. But as far as I'm concerned, when this comes, then yes, we'll sit down with our suppliers, renegotiate in terms of payment, and make sure that this all works. But right now, in the Canadian environment, there's something missing.
Yeah. But from a retail perspective, checks are not fun. I mean, when I worked at Just Energy, we had lock boxes all over the place. We would have some idea of how much money's in there, but we couldn't use it for anything, and it took a couple of days for the checks to clear. Yep. And then a lot of checks came in. You mentioned Mr. and Mrs. Videotron. We had all this money sitting there that we didn't even know what account to put towards until the customer called in pissed off because you couldn't find their payment. Yeah. So, and the number of people to reconcile and to even just scan the checks over to the banks, I mean, I'd like to see it go away.
Done. So we
have new tools now, though.
Yeah.
I mean, these the scanners and you deposit it
Yeah,
right
we had
away.
a scanner.
These are all great tools that I didn't at Videotron. We didn't experiment these. Besides the Mrs. Videotron, which could be for checks or any other type of payment.
Sure.
Checks were handled, I would say, very well by the company, and even better now with the
So we have 10 more minutes. So I do want to touch base on technologies, right? So we've spoken about blockchain, about AI as informal conversation. Do you see those technologies or any others as enablers for the treasury professionals?
I love the idea of blockchain, and my husband always laughs because whenever I say that, it means I'm not actually going to do anything about it. I love the idea of it. Like, ooh, swimming right now when it's 50 degrees. Great idea. But honestly, when things happen like what we saw in February where Canada's largest crypto exchange, the CEO died. His 115,000 customers then lost their $250 million of digital assets because nobody had the keys to get in to unlock them. There's been a lot of stuff happening on the asset recovery with respect to that, but when those incidents happen, it really slows down the adoption of those types of technologies.
Right, I agree. But would you think, so in digital currency space, do you think the opportunity for central bank to issue central bank digital currencies or stable coins like JP Morgan just did could potentially bring additional benefits to treasurers? UBS talking about settlement coin, right?
I think payment processes are probably in a really good situation to help move forward these things because they'll be able to provide a platform for increased liquidity, decreased liability, and hopefully companies wouldn't have to invest in the actual infrastructure required to do a lot of that, the payment processors could do that. So I think they're in a good place to push forward some of this technology. But
well, Tim Berners-Lee told us not to use blockchain for payments, so we're kidding. So we probably won't try. Cathy, any thoughts on blockchain or AI?
So an interesting, I heard recently a treasurer talked about why they decided to pay and receive in Bitcoins. One reason was to attract the right employees. So this was an engineering company. I guess it was a very tight market. They really wanted those new innovators, those that were on the edge and really liked to push the technology envelope. So they made it part of their hiring strategy, if you will, to say, hey, if you want to be paid in Bitcoins, we'll take care of that.
That's awesome.
It was really fascinating. And another treasurer said they actually decided to accept Bitcoins. They were a charitable organization because that broadened the source of revenue for them.
Sure.
So it was just interesting to me when I heard those two examples. Sometimes it's the least obvious thing on why you make a change versus the technology and the instantaneousness of it and things like that. So I think there's something there. I certainly as I talk to treasurers, I'm not hearing will it solve our traceability? Will it solve reconciliation? I don't know. So I think it's still a big question mark.
It's still big. Yeah.
And it's complicated. I mean, blockchain is very complicated, and I make a point of not using a product that I don't understand. So I don't pay through. Yeah. So and it's very complicated.
Yeah. So quickly, any last thoughts on trends or things that you think gonna happen this year or next, or things which makes you excited for Treasury?
Something I was involved in before I left Just Energy was RPA, so robotic process automation. So finding the right company to work with to try to teach some internal folk how to program bots to do simple things, repeatable tasks. The example I use is we programmed a bot to help us with taxes. So this bot went online and pulled the information we needed, the proper forms. It then went internally and found the information, and it took a 16-hour job and made it 15 minutes. So we still need a person to look at it and make sure that it's working properly. The numbers make sense, but just looking at something so mundane as doing your taxes, it was really exciting to see that put into practice.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to I think my earlier point around we spend a lot of time and energy in talking about the new sexy payment product technology thing that's coming, and that's fantastic. But spending the time thinking about the on-ramp or the off-ramp, doing your taxes, it has to happen. And so spending time and energy thinking about that on-ramp and off-ramp and making that simple and really being able to get rid of, sorry, the term frictionless on-ramping or off-ramping, or having a common on-ramp or a common off-ramp, because right now you probably have 6 or 7 depending on the systems you have or the technologies you use. So being able to do that, and also as an organization, we're looking to innovate, doing very similar things with RPA that Kate spoke to, because it's those simple things that continue to take up our time, create risk, and really hard to business case.
Look at me, and I seem to all of the above, and at the same, yeah, it's just, I'm just thinking in terms of a lot of things are digital, but there's a lot of things that, and you know, the KYC, the account opening, all the gruesome tasks. And it is.
That's a good word.
That's a good word for it.
Oh, it is. It is. And how can it be standardized so that we don't? Because right now, if you open a bank account, you need to. Each and every single bank has their own format, and that's. And I mean, if someone out there has a solution for all of that, so that it can be much faster and easier, I'm all for it, because that's something that's going to help a lot.
I loved your analogy earlier about the swimming in the Australian Ocean, right?
Yeah.
Because I love the way you describe it. So you can see this beautiful ocean. So the analogy is real-time rails, you know, traceability, ISO 20022, blockchain, AI, like automation, everything, right? But what you don't see, or maybe see a bit, the sharks, the things that, like the KYC, the account opening, the jellyfish that could bite you in the process. So how do you?
And honestly, and we didn't even talk about the crocodiles that also can get you. So honestly, that's sort of, and that's fraud.
Yeah.
So it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And,
okay. So we have only 4 minutes left. We had another thing we wanted to chat about, but maybe we can open it for questions. Sure. And oh yeah.
Oh, we've got our.
There were some people with mics.
You were going to do the mic?
Yes, but you were going to tell me. So.
We need the mic.
Thank you. Or if you can scream.
Sure. So this question is mainly for Cathy.
Yep.
With real-time rail coming in and all of those things with changes coming to Bank of Canada and everywhere else to do a real-time settlement, how is it going to impact the Treasury Department themselves? So just for example, if Chloé decides to send out a $200 million real-time payment at 8 p.m. the night to HSBC, markets are closed, HSBC can't go out to do a borrowing. And of course, HSBC is not going to keep $200 million out floating around, so that gold can sometimes do real-time payment. How is that going to impact HSBC or for that matter any other banks? Or how is Treasury team planning to take care of those?
Yeah, no, I'll repeat. So the question, really, I think the question you're asking is real-time payments, the real-time, the links replacement that's happening. That's going to change Treasury at the bank as well, fundamentally. So when Chloe's ready to send that to take $200 million out of the account, how does this all going to work? We're going to face the same challenges from a Treasury perspective. It's outside of my level of expertise, but it would be the same situation that Kate and Chloé would talk about, because the bank's treasurer is going to be doing the same thing and trying to figure out the collateral and figuring out where we find the additional funding or go to the market and things like that. So that's going to be exactly the same. That
real-time rail will be kept.
Pardon me?
Real-time rail will be kept by amount. For now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But fundamentally, it's
still,
a culture
right.
change that's required,
Yeah.
right? It's a culture change for everybody involved. Systems are going to play a huge part in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we live in a batch world.
That's the main part of we want to go real time on the front, but we are at the back. We are at the batch world.
Yeah.
Especially markets close at 5 p.m. EST.
Well,
Yes.
you need a cutoff time
Yeah.
at some point in order to.
Yeah.
And Chloé
But
mentioned
it's
this
gonna be-
earlier, if you have this, this real time, but one spot is not real time, then you're not going to really get truly real time everywhere.
And real time when you're global. Right now, if I'm sending something in Australia, it's already tomorrow. So that's another element you have to contend with and figure out.
There's another question in the back.
Thank you.
Thanks.
No time to swim.
So
takeaway I note down. So traceability is very important. Richer data for automatic reconciliation and instant payment. If you would have to classify them priority, which one would be the first one?
For me, it depends on the type of business. So if you're dealing with a retail where you have millions of customers, then that traceability and reconciliation might be really big because you'll spend a lot of time trying to reconcile those payments. So kind of depends in my perspective.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. For small ticket items,
Traceability.
small ticket item, you need richness in the data because you need to be able to apply it and not having this Mrs. Vidéotron lying around. In terms of large ticket, it's traceability. And knowing, you know, if you're subscribed to a 2-hour service, then it's a 2-hour service, and you know where it is in the chain. So the larger ticket, the larger time-sensitive ticket amount, the traceability is incredibly important.
So the speed of the payment is always number 3 in those 3 takeaways.
Honestly, the real-time aspect, eventually we'll get there, I think, but it means that yes, the banks need to be real time, but the company, and as Kate mentioned, needs also to be real time. And sometimes you have systems that you need, you know, an overnight update to update all your client files.
Mm-hmm.
So even as you mentioned, you receive the information, you're not going to go until the next day. Your customer center is only going to know the next day when the payment has been applied. So that creates issues. Yeah. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to get there.
There's a question in the back as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
One quick question. We have sort of talked about real-time, the pathway to real-time treasury. I think what people haven't discussed is the impact of a tightening monetary policy is going to sort of reduce, is going to constrain treasurers' ability to keep excess cash purely because of the punitive costs of increased interest rates. So once you consider that the velocity of payments is increasing, at the same time, interest rates are going up. What tools are treasurers going to use from a forecasting perspective to make sure that this excess cash is reduced?
What tools? Gosh, well, I was involved in the implementation of a treasury management system, which solves a lot of problems for an organization, but not all of them. When you think about the number of banks you need to connect to, even if you have direct connectivity with them, you're still maybe only getting updates twice a day. If you want it more often than that, then you have to pay for it. So in my mind, a treasury management system or an ERP treasury-related app might do it. But again, when you find that really good treasury management system that can do a great job at cash forecasting or provide you that real-time view of where all your money is sitting across the globe, it might not be as great in some other areas, right? So through my search for a treasury management system, they don't all offer everything. It really depends on what you're trying to solve.
And is a fintech, to answer your question, so we have a cash and liquidity management solution, and that's exactly what we are trying to do. But again, the impairment is the open banking. So as soon as the APIs become more available, we could pull this information, and we currently working with some banks just to do that. But if the more that is, there's going to be able to see consolidated position and be able to assess what risk you have in every currency, because we would be becoming like an extension of a bank ledger.
Yeah, there's the information. The information is key of having your balances. That's one thing. But treasury forecasting is, I would say, more an art than a science, and it really depends on the type of industry that you deal with. In my previous life, Vidéotron, utility-like, it was honestly much easier to forecast your inflows and your outflows. In a company like Bombardier, where your clients, it's a big, large, lumpy payment. It relates to reaching certain milestone. So you have to be able to forecast when you're going to reach that specific milestone, and that client will accept said milestone and pay. So that makes it much more complicated to have the forecast and accessibility of cash. So I would say that that's the challenge or the beauty of the thing, whether you look.
Any other questions over here? Thank you, Jude.
Thanks, Jude.
Thank you. To what extent is the data revolution, the accessibility, availability, the growing availability of data a kind of next frontier to treasury, or where will this impact the treasury function or other functions within corporates? What is the opinion of the panel on this? Pretty open question, I realize.
How
So I
will
think
big
the
data
the
impact
data,
treasury?
right? Yeah, yeah. So I think the first thing, the standardization is still key. If you have a lot of data, but you don't know what it is and how to read it and how to write algorithms on top of it to make use of the data, it's nothing, right? Assuming there is a consideration,
Utopia.
then you can start doing better forecasting. You start building models on top of this data to try to see the trends, to try to see the connectivity and links between the different pieces of information. So, right. I think that's probably going to
The
be where-
forecasting element, you need to understand, in order to be able to forecast your cash, you need to understand your business and what are the drivers. So, and that's how you can construct better cash forecasting. In terms of having that data, it's not because you have tons of data that it's necessarily useful or reliable. So that you need to be able to sift through. And that's where I think is a challenge right now. There's tons of data available everywhere, but is it valuable? That's where the challenge is.
I sort of think of it as sort of an evolution. So today, you can reconcile, it's people, or you can outsource this to other groups like HSBC. We can do the reconciliation. So that because there's not standards definitely in the corporate space, it can happen, but there's a cost to it. And then as we evolve, having standards, so it simplifies it, it automates it, and then the third level I would see is then what can you learn from the data about your customers, because there could be some interesting customer buying behavior that could inform your product strategy, as an example. So I see it as an evolution, but I think it's absolutely critical to where we need to get to in order to have this real-time treasury.
You're right that in a retail space, you can predict the behavior.
Yeah.
So it's much easier to predict your cash forecast. Then we had that, and it's a combination of the bank system and the behavior. And I had an instance in Videotron where we could forecast like exactly when our checks were going out. And at one time, we started being off all the time by 3 days. And we were wondering what's going on. And then we realized something as stupid as there was a problem with in union, and now the check, and that's old story, it's like going forward, but it's just to give you an example. And basically the union was sending the check somewhere else to be stamped because we had no one from this particular union that could stamp the checks. And that added 3 days to the process. But it's just things like that it gets in the way. So by understanding, but I think that for retail, in terms of cash inflow, that's something that can be done. For B2B, it's much more difficult. You need to work much harder at your cash forecast and realizing that cash, and that involves the operation aspect of things. So that's really different.
More upstream data in B2B can be very beneficial then.
Yes, definitely. You need to, and it's difficult inside a very large organization to put this in place, because you need to be directly at the front line of the people of the production saying, when are you going to produce? When is it going to be there? What are, and you have to have likelihood, when do you think this particular client will accept, the trade and make the payment? And then you have governments. Government, usually, even if it's a payment, usually what we see is that government or provinces, they pay at the end of a quarter. They sort of look at the budget and then bang, they pay at the end of the quarter. These are patterns that we see. So these are all elements, and that's why I say more art than science. It's difficult to program these things.
I think your question really applies, obviously, to anything, right? Taking data and turning it into information that you can use. So for me, at Just Energy, we're like a utility. We have customer usage patterns. We know how much they're using in the winter versus the summertime. We know how much they're paying, how much their neighbor's paying. So how can we use this data to provide for a better customer experience to our customers, and how does that allow us to get more customers?
Any other questions? Over here.
Making you run. Thanks, Jude.
There's been discussions at Payments Canada and in the industry for quite a while actually now about using ISO 20022. There's been a lot of discussion on this panel about data and straight-through reconciliation. And I'm curious if we had a magic wand and ISO 20022 was live in Canada for real-time payments and wires and batch, how long would it be before you'd be able to make use of it? Would that be a multi-year project on the corporate side? Would it be something that you're already ready for? I'm just curious as to how hard a job it would be for you to make that switch.
Especially at Bombardier.
Well, yeah, well, Bombardier, it's just, yeah, the answer, and you're not going to like it, it really depends. Are your systems integrated or not? Because that really changes. For example, a company, Videotron, which is very, very much integrated with not a lot of system, it could be quite fast. It would be really what would limit us is, has our vendor already has the patch or whatever embedded in it, and then you go live. So that's sort of, but when you go into a company that has multiple systems, or is at different level of sophistication, that's when, it gets much slower. And obviously for Bombardier has operation in Canada, but all over the world. So obviously it's a tiny portion of everything else and all the payment platform that it uses. So yeah, unfortunately it depends on your reality. Are you centralized on your platform?
Yeah. That's fair. Anyone else? Okay, so then I want to take this opportunity to mention that this is one of the 3 panels in the Payment Summit, which is all women. So last year, I think there is one.
It's a 300% increase.
Yeah, so from last year, 300% increase. So we're definitely making progress. But I was wondering that the diversity and I guess inclusion, and specifically in financial industry, has been a hot topic in the last year. I was lucky to participate in the Rise Up program for Money 2020, where they empowered, and let people, brought in women to collaborate, to network, specifically to enable them to build a larger network and sponsors and mentors, etc., which was a great experience. But I wonder, from your perspective, do you think we are done? Are we still going somewhere? Is there still need to do more?
So before the session, we were in the Women in Fintech panel, and I have to say there was about 4 token males in the audience and about 50 women.
Wow.
So, gosh, there's so many things we can do, but I really think that we need men to support it as much as women do, because you hear women talk about it all the time. Even though it's proven that companies with more women, 50% kind of thing, they do better. They make more money. They have more engagement with their employees. They attract better talent. Gosh, I could talk about this forever and ever. But there are some things that I think that we need to get better at. Inherently, men are good at some things and women are good at some other things. So as long as we make sure that there's training available to support our people. So things like women don't necessarily network as easily as men do, or even work on their personal brand. So I think that we can do a lot more with respect to training and making sure that we have the resources available to know that what we need to do to be able to put ourselves at the table more.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I remember when we discussed this, I said it's going to depend on my mood of the day. And I mean, it's been 20 years, and I've done so many things in terms of treasury. Obviously, cash management was my first baby, but I did derivatives. Obviously, a lot involved in debt capital market or M&A, and it really. And when I left my previous company, there were a lot of women now in the finance department. When I came into Bombardier in terms of VP, apparently I was the only woman that was a VP in the finance department. So depending on the industry, I think there's still work to be done for women representation, and I don't want token woman or whatever. I don't want that, but I think that there's been a lot of evolution, and I went to this actually dinner before Michelle Obama came in Montreal. I think she went in Toronto as well. And they organized a dinner, and I remember doing such an event about 10 years ago where they invited the treasurer and the CFOs of Montreal, women treasurer and CFO in Montreal. We were like 6.
Wow.
And at that event, in between CFOs and treasurer, we were about 30. So it's just to say that the world is evolving, And I think that, but I don't want to put necessarily genders. I just want people to be able, and I want to teach my daughter that you can do whatever you want. It doesn't matter if you're a guy or a girl, you just do it. And I think that this new generation, she's 13, they see it differently. So I think it's a good thing.
The training needs to be on both sides.
Yeah.
Men have to learn that they don't have to be this macho person. They can be a nurse. They can do these other historically women jobs and be super happy doing it. So yeah.
I look forward to the day when someone can stand on stage and say there are as many women CEOs as there are CEOs named John. Because apparently there are more CEOs named John than there are women who are CEOs.
Oh.
So I still think we, seriously.
Wow.
So we still have a bit of a way to go, and I think we have to find our voice. So I think these types of situations. So when we were, ideating on what we could do here, well, let's see if we can get an all-female panel together, and we did it. And I think that's fantastic. So thank you. Cool. So I'd encourage everyone who's in an opportunity to represent, be out there, find your voice, bring a diverse panel to the conversation. And as you say, Chloe, it could be gender, it could be anything. I think that diversity just creates a very, very different conversation. And both men and women, continue to support various organizations. There's Women in Payments. There's all sorts of interesting organizations out there that really help to nurture and foster women networking and growing and finding their voice. So thanks for the opportunity.
Oh,
and
you're
Elena,
welcome.
you did a great job. Thank you.
And I think what came out in the last session as well, that I think we need men support, and we need acknowledgement that, sometimes you need to sponsor someone. If you believe in them, you need to coach them and you need to tell them, take this opportunity, don't be afraid, because sometimes women are shy. I used to be shy. You don't believe it now, but I used to be. So I think I think we're making a lot of progress, but I think it's still
a long way to go. This is where all the men need to clap, by the way.
Yes.
A little clap for us. Hey.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.